Welcome to another episode of Consumer Protection and You with Ryan Lippe. Ryan is a consumer educator with Ohio Attorney General Dave Yost office. Today we're going to be talking with Sylvia about elder abuse and fraud, so stay tuned. Welcome to another episode of Consumer Protection and You with Ryan Lippe. Ryan Lippe is a consumer educator with Ohio Attorney General Dave Yost office. Ryan, it's always a pleasure talking with you.
Great. Thanks for having me on.
It's just amazing how much information is really out there that we need to keep an eyeball on.
Well, and this time we're bringing in an expert, a subject matter expert that's well known in her field of elder abuse and financial exploitation. So we would like to welcome Sylvia Pla-Raith to the microphone. She is a director. She's director of the Elder Justice Unit with the Ohio Attorney General's office, and like me, works in the Consumer Protection section.
Thanks, Ryan. Thank you so much for introducing me. And Patrick, thank you for having me on the show today. This is very excited to be here today to talk about how to protect seniors and offer them some support.
Well, before we begin, would you mind telling the listening audience a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So as Ryan said, we work together. The Elder Justice Unit was added to the office back in 2014 because folks really were pushing the Attorney General's office to have a unit that was designated specifically for older adults. So in my position, I don't do any direct investigations. What we do is we help guide consumers when they call the office when they're dealing with some issues. So Ohio has what I would call a complex elder justice system. There's a lot of different organizations that have something to do. And so people sometimes get lost in trying to find the right system. So we help guide them. We also get a lot of calls from professionals who need help trying to figure out which way to go. So I've kind of used the metaphor that I'm a navigator because my job is to get you to the right system without necessarily involving myself as the actual investigator. But I do have that background. For 10 years, I was a chief supervisor for Cuyahoga County, their Adult Protective Service program. And then prior to that, I was working in the field as a licensed social worker. So I always tell people I'm not an attorney, I just happen to work for one. So sometimes I sound like one, but I'm actually a social worker and that knows a lot about older adults and those resources, which is important when you're doing my job because you want to be able to guide people in a lot of different areas.
Is elder abuse really prevalent in Ohio?
Absolutely. And it's just not for folks that have lost their senses or have dementia or have Alzheimer's. Clearly, those are all extreme vulnerabilities. But elder abuse can happen to anyone. Elder fraud and financial exploitation can happen to anyone when you get older. Sylvia, go ahead and talk a little bit about just basics of elder abuse and what we need to know in Ohio about the prevalence of elder abuse in our communities.
Oh, sure, Ryan. So it's happening every day, Patrick, and it happens like Ryan said everywhere. But so the research suggests that 1 in every 10 older adult is subjected to some type of elder abuse or exploitation. So we know, and then we also know it's severely underreported because it's hard for an older adult to come forward and say, that I've been taken advantage of, either because sometimes they don't know it because the bad guys are just that good in tricking and deceiving them. Sometimes they may have some health issues, so they don't understand that it's happening. And then sometimes they're just in denial. If I tell my family member that I did this, they're going to think I'm old or crazy or I can't live alone. And so they're afraid that we'll take away their independence if they tell us they need help. So for lots of reasons, typically the older adult doesn't come forward. One of the reasons that the Attorney General created the Elder Justice Unit was to do talks just like we're doing right now. We know that the best protection is to get folks to understand and recognize the signs and symptoms so they don't fall prey. But if they do, we also want them to feel confident in calling us for help, because the sooner we address it, the sooner we can stop it. Because what we see way too often is they don't tell anyone, the problem grows exponentially because the bad guys, they're pretty good. Once you fall prey to one person, they typically will use that information against you. They'll sell it to other bad guys. We call it the sucker list. The bad guys will share your information with other bad guys. So not only are you now falling victim to them, but there's other people preying. They're like vultures. I know Ryan talks about this all the time, but they will take advantage of you until there's not much left. And then even then, this is what's really serious and scary. The bad guys don't want to, once they've invested all that time and energy on you as the trust, they'll use you in some ways criminally, what they call it money muling. Well, they'll use you to launder the money. So some of our older adults are not only being scammed, but they're also being utilized to commit crimes against other folks because they're using them to launder the money. So it's really, and it's the fastest growing allegation because for lots of reasons. One is you have the internet, and it's just so much easier to steal the money. And your information's out there because some of our older adults will say, well, I'm not on Facebook and I don't do this and I didn't do that. But your family members are. So the bad guys are not just looking out for what information you're posting, but also what your family members might be having some information posted. But so it's easier to steal the money. We have a growing population of older adults in Ohio. I think every county is growing in the 60 plus. And in the year 2050, they say there's going to be more people turning 80 than there are turning 18, just to put in perspective. So we're definitely getting an older Ohio. So the bad guys know it. And Ryan taught me that 70% of our nation's wealth lies in people 55 and older. So the bad guys know that you're desirable to them.
Now, when you say bad guys, we always think of what I usually refer to as perpetrators, the strangers, the ones that call you on the phone, just cold call you, or the ones that knock on your door, the ones that send you an email and you've never heard from them before. But I think maybe the most destructive and consequential problem is with relatives and with friends and with caregivers, people the older adult already knows. Sylvia's taught me that so upwards of 90% of all elder abuse happens with the victim already knowing the perpetrator in some respect, either a distant relative, a close relative, a friend of the family. Can you talk about that aspect of it, Sylvia?
Sure, Ryan. So when I use the term elder abuse, typically you're correct. We typically about 89% of the offender are committed by someone that the person knows, and that's important because they're really exploiting is a relationship of trust. And what I've learned is that and I call them bad guys, but I think I've heard someone call them bad actors. I've heard the word perpetrator, suspect, offenders. And after 5 o'clock, I can call them something else. But these people take advantage of certain vulnerabilities. So they study victims very carefully, and they do things like you and I wouldn't do. Like, for instance, they'll look at obituaries because they know that after the death of a loved one, most people are not themselves. It takes a good year to recover, which is why they'll take advantage. And when we meet with people, we always talk about, when did you meet? Because we're trying to figure out in what circumstances did this person come into your life? Is it someone you know all along, or is it someone who's now taking advantage of you? So exploitation is a little different because the bad guy could be anyone. Abuse, when I use the word abuse, I typically think of physical, emotional, or sexual abuse. That's typically, or neglect, because that's when you depend on someone for help. So the 80% of perpetrators are typically connected to abuse. Exploitation, there's different types of exploitation. So we use the term hybrid. Hybrid exploitation is when the bad guy is using a way to control you. Like a family member, for instance, might use emotional abuse. They might say to you, I'm the only person that takes care of you. If it wasn't for me, you would be in a nursing home. So hybrid exploitation, the bad guy's using some form of control to take your money. They might over-medicate you. That happens all the time. If you're confused, you're not going to know, and it's easier to steal your money. So so that you'll see the pure exploitation is more of what we see at the consumer protection section, Ryan. That's when the perpetrators are just after your money, and they're usually coming at you through the phone or the internet or a mail. So there's not a personal relationship. But in talking to when I talk to my seniors, because we're older adults, what I find out happens is that the pure exploiters will end up developing a relationship with the victim by the phone, and will promise them friendship. They'll promise them marriage. They'll promise them things that I'm going to come and help you in order to get their control to steal the money. So they're using very similar tactics of power and control, even if you're a stranger who develops a relationship or a family member. But it's very difficult, and you're going to want to you kind of use the same type of interventions to stop it. Because first of all, you want to make sure you have you want to identify the problem. As I always tell people, the only way to solve a problem, we need to know and recognize it happened. But once we identify it, then we have to figure out what steps do we need to do to separate the bad guy from the victim. And actually, I was on a phone call this morning with someone who she's a social worker with the VA. So the guy who's being exploited is actually a veteran. One of the things I was telling her, we have to figure out ways how to separate the perpetrator from the victim, because she's actually preying on multiple people. Because that's the other thing I've learned, is a lot of these people have serial tendencies. They'll have more than one victim. That's why it's so important to stop them, because it's typically not just the one person you know about. There's multiple other victims. So it's important to stop it, because you might be saving many people.
What are some common scams or common frauds that we don't hear about, but we need to be aware of?
You know, a lot of the scams that we hear about are fairly common, but you may not know about them. I mean, those are two different points of view, I think. I mean, just because they're common doesn't mean we all know about them and they're all common sense. We do see a lot of imposter scams, where we see someone pretending to be the IRS or pretending to be Social Security. And I've talked about that before on the program, where they demand payment and they demand personal information like a Social Security number, and they'll threaten the older adult. They'll say they're going to get arrested if they don't comply, or the sheriff's going to visit and they're going to go to jail. We see a lot of romance scams, and the older adults are particularly vulnerable to scammers that have phony profiles on dating websites, or they call up a senior and they get some camaraderie and they build some trust for a few weeks with the senior, and they claim to be the latest love or claim to be their boyfriend or girlfriend. And after developing the relationship, which again can sometimes take weeks or months, the scammer will finally ask the victim to send money. And then it obviously doesn't stop there. They'll go after that pocketbook until the senior runs out, as Sylvia was saying. We also see a lot of sweepstakes and lottery scams, where a senior will be told they've won the lottery. And this is especially true with those that may be low or middle income. Again, it's not necessarily a lack of education or a lack of capacity, or this really is just someone who is very trusting and wants to believe that maybe they did win it big, maybe something came around and luck is in their favor. And they'll claim that you've won money, but in order to collect the winnings, the older adult is forced to pay money. Right. In order to collect. And they always want the money first, because there's no prize. There's no pot of money at the end of the rainbow. Everything's fictitious, yet the senior thinks it's real. And so when Sylvia mentions that it's difficult to convince an older adult that they've been scammed, I don't think a week goes by that we don't see an episode where a relative is calling our office and trying to intervene in the senior's business, because that business is fraudulent. So go ahead and take that, Sylvia. What other scams do we see that maybe we don't know enough about?
I think the one that's real popular that you didn't mention is the grandparent scam, when the bad guy pretends to be a grandchild who was either traveling or they're in a car accident. So they tend to call in the middle of the night to catch you when you're disoriented and you don't have time to check the facts with a family member, to let them know the grandchild that typically they need money to get out of jail, and don't tell anyone. Because when I talk to seniors, I always ask in the audience who has grandkids, and many of them raise their hands. The next question is, would you do anything for your grandchild? And so the hands stay up, because what the perpetrators are not necessarily after you because of you mental decline. They're looking at it from an emotional perspective. So they don't want to give you time to think. That's why it's very intentional that the phone call comes at nighttime, because you're disoriented and they can trick you with the voice. They might plug their nose and say, well, it doesn't sound like you. And then they say, well, I've been in a car accident. My nose is all swollen. I mean, they try to give them all kinds of reasons why they sound different. But most grandparents don't want anything bad to happen to their grandchild. So without even checking the facts, they go ahead and start sending money. Is that we're seeing an uptake right now during the pandemic. People being vulnerable and befriended, because you've got two big factors that are going on right now that are driving this. First of all, you have isolation. So for some of us, staying safe at home is a way to protect yourself from the pandemic, but you're also cutting yourself off from the safety nets if you normally would see people to check in with you. So people are vulnerable because they're lonely. So the bad guys know this, and so we've seen an uptake in our romance schemes where people are falling for a relationship that under normal circumstances wouldn't have happened, because they would be going to the senior center, they would be going out to lunch with their friends. So it'll be interesting once Ohio starts returning back to normal to find out exactly how many folks have been befriended during the pandemic. And I know that I'm biased because I work in this field. I've been in elder justice now for over 30 years. I've been involved in working with elder justice, and I used to trust people. I used to tell people I used to be a nice person before I became the director of elder justice. Now I don't trust people as much as I used to, and I also know money's a big factor and driver to get people to do bad things. So I'm really curious to see, once we go back, just to what extent older adults were taken advantage of during this time.
You had mentioned earlier that senior citizens don't necessarily feel good about reporting.
It's a big problem.
How do you encourage individuals to come forward?
Well, first of all, we have to do talks like you're doing today, Patrick. We have to make sure, and they have to realize that it's normal, and it's not just because they're old. Anyone can be befriended. So we want to normalize the experience. We also want to support them. That isn't about them being dumb or inexperienced or we want to make sure it's because the blame belongs with the responsibility falls on the bad actor using them and taking advantage of them. So we want to support them in saying that it's not, they didn't do anything wrong. The bad guy did it wrong. And then we also want to encourage them to feel comfortable telling someone, because the sooner they get help, the better, and the higher the chances are of stopping it. Because what Ryan said is correct. Typically, once they latch on and find a victim, they'll hang on to you until there's very little, if anything, left. And then you're dealing with the fallout. So some of the family members are calling us because they're trying to figure out how to stop it. And that's why we have a lot of consumer protection information. I had a call recently with the family down in Cincinnati. It's the same scenario. The kids, the adult children are trying to convince dad that the mail that he's getting is fraudulent, that this is not, he did not win the lottery, that they're trying to prove it. And so far, because the bad guy is very good at getting the older adult to not trust their family. Don't tell your kids because they're not going to believe you. And so what happens is that they stop trusting the people who care about them, and they latch onto the perpetrator that becomes like their one friend, because they isolate them. They're very smart. They get the senior to trust them, and then they break their relationship with other people so they can continue to control them. So sharing our publication with family members, I always say to them, we have to try to educate the victim. So if the victim doesn't realize they're a victim, the first step is, can we educate them? Can we convince them that the grandparent scheme and how it works, so they realize this isn't true? because you want to try to stop it. And if we can't convince them, the next step for me, and that's what I do as a social worker, is we do end up sometimes having to bring in the medical industry because we need to find out if we can't get this person to stop on their own, can we stop it because there can be a court intervention or a way of either power of attorney or something to stop the person from giving away that money. So it's easier to help someone who wants help. It's harder to help someone who doesn't want help.
Now, in terms of turning for help, I always promote the Ohio Attorney General's office, but there are times when there's other tools in the toolbox.
Right.
I mean, there are times when you want to call the local police department.
Right.
There are times when you want to call Adult Protective Services, an organization that every county has that we haven't even started to talk about yet.
Right.
When are the times to call those other authorities? When do you call the AG's office? And what can those other organizations do as a resource to someone?
So it's always good to call us because we can help you make a phone call and help guide you. So I always tell people, if you don't remember anything I said today, at least remember that the Elder Justice Unit is there because we can help guide you. So when people call us, sometimes it's their first call and we help guide them to the right organization. So it might be our office, it might be Consumer Protection Section, it might be healthcare fraud, because if the older adult lives in a facility, we're going to involve healthcare fraud. If they live in the community, Adult Protective Services is the authorized agent to investigate cases of abuse and exploitation if someone lives in the community and they're 60 years old. Sometimes, so that's where, when I say we need a navigator, we do, because where they live, is the bad guy known to them, a stranger? Is the bad guy a professional? Because if the bad guy is a staff person of the facility, we're going to want to include the healthcare fraud section as well as maybe the health department. So if the bad guy is a broker or an investor, we're going to want to involve the Department of Commerce. So when someone calls my unit, we ask a lot of questions because we're trying to figure out, based on the scenario, based on the age of the adult, where they live, we try to figure out which would be the best organization to connect them to. When you mention the police, these cases are tricky, Ryan and Patrick, because sometimes we don't know if it's is it a civil matter, or is it a criminal matter? And another reason these cases fall in the cracks is because if the bad guy's family, or the bad guy's a guardian, or is the bad guy power of attorney, sometimes the police will think it's a civil matter because it's family. And then sometimes when you call Adult Protective Services, because it sounds like, exploitation does sound a lot like a theft. So that sounds like a crime occurred. So then sometimes folks get told, well, you have to go, if you contact APS, and they'll say, no, you need to call the police. So we find ourselves a mediator between those two systems, because sometimes you need both. Sometimes a crime is civil, but it also is criminal in nature, and you actually need both involved, because so we do a lot of connecting the dots for the victims and trying to get collaboration with the different professionals when we feel it's warranted.
We only have a few minutes left. Can I ask both of you to sort of give some words of wisdom?
Well, I want to encourage folks to reach out and ask. If you see something, say something. We're a good organization to call, because I don't have the authority to make you do anything. I'm going to give you some good information and guide you and give you some good advice. But the first defense in stopping a problem is admitting it. So I'm going to help guide you to figuring that out.
And I want to encourage people to be involved in seniors' lives, in older adults' lives. Stay connected and encourage that older adult to stay connected with other people, with people their age, as well as with relatives and friends that are younger. Because it's really those connections that help dispel myths and help break through some of the scams that we see. A lot of scammers will say, well, please don't tell your relatives. Don't keep this between us, because we don't want the word to get out. The reason they don't want the word to get out is because they are scamming the older adult, right? And they're worried about people understanding the scam when the older adult may not. So it's very important to encourage loved ones to talk to you. Don't think you're going to be judged if you're an older adult, and stay connected with people your age, stay connected with people younger, stay connected with people older. We all have to look out for each other.
That's a good point.
So how can we get in contact with each of you?
So we're both so you can get a hold of us through online, because the Ohio Attorney General has ohioprotects.org is a great website, has all the information. But I want to give you my email address because we just got a new one, and it's easy now to say. It's my name, Sylvia, Sylvia, my last name, PLA-RAITH at ohioago.gov. ohioago.gov it's because I can probably help guide you and give you the right information, because we do a lot of educational series, and we do have one coming up on June 28th for Elder Abuse Awareness Day that I can get people information about our function that we're doing.
And I would definitely encourage people to get in contact with Sylvia if they want to participate in the elder forum that's coming up in June. I want to give you 2 toll-free numbers. Everybody likes toll-free numbers. For the Ohio Attorney General, it's 800-282-0515. So 800-282-0515. And if you need adult protective services, if you've exhausted your resources and you need someone to get involved, 1-855-6446-277. So it's actually 855 Ohio APS. So 1-855 Ohio APS. That's the Adult Protective Services. Let them know what county you're in, and they will get you, no matter what 88 counties you're in, you are covered under some Adult Protective Services organization. Right. They can get you to the right one.
Right. That number will take you to the county that you're in. And thank you for sharing our 800 number. And you can always ask for the Elder Justice Unit. So that we have one number for all 33 sections. It makes it easy for anyone to reach us. And if you call that number and you have a question about an older adult, you can say you have a referral for the Elder Justice Unit, and it'll come to our attention.
Okay. And then in the description below, we'll also have that besides we get on the screen. Sylvia, Ryan.
Thank you.
Great information. I really appreciate your sharing that information.
Well, thank you, Patrick. And thank you, Ryan, for inviting me. This was fun.
Great. Thanks to everybody. It's just like with so many problems and solutions, it's a partnership.
Yes, that is correct.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I'm Patrick Dangle. Thank you for viewing, and look forward to another Consumer Protection and You.